3spooky5me Part 2 at the bottom of the garden. David Campbell. Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of the New to You Show. We are now 2 episodes into our 3spooky5me series, where we're taking you on a romp through this October with all the super duper scary stuff. We're plussing ourselves beyond our first 2 spooky episodes.
Yeah, we're going way out.
Yeah, way creepy.
So much further out.
So spooky. This is a media review podcast where we talk about all kinds of stuff on a topic. I'm one of your hosts, John Holt.
I'm your other host, Julian Cage.
I'm your other host, Keith Vincent.
And our guests.
Hey, I'm Jocko Farino.
And joining us,
Matt Schwartz.
All right. So again, awesome that we have 5 guests or 5 hosts for this spooky
Big
thing.
discussion.
We're just
stuff.
Jumping up the game. We're making it all kinds of crazy.
Jumping it up, just like everybody says.
Right.
We're really jumping up the game today.
Yep. And they said we couldn't do it.
They did. They kept saying that.
Don't do it.
They said you
Please
guys
don't
can't
do
get
that.
even spookier than
Like,
last year.
How are you guys going to do it? You only have 4 microphones.
We'll just get real close.
And talk loudly.
Yeah. Can you hear me over here?
Yeah, you're good. You're good. Keep talking.
All right. So last week I brought, with Jules' help, Candle Cove. That was our pick. And this week we are having our guest, Matt.
Yes.
Bring his pick and go for it. Take it away.
Sounds good. So it's a short story called At the Bottom of the Garden by David Campton, and if you haven't read it yet, you can go online and Google it. Or
Pause right now, and in 5 minutes, come back having read
Exactly. It takes no time to read. It's not exactly new to me, but I haven't read it in about 25 years until this past week, so I wanted to go back. But I do find it to be one of the most traumatizing short stories to me. And basically, as someone who's read like thousands and thousands of horror short stories, this one has stuck with me more. It's probably in my top 10 of all time for horror short stories. As with many short stories, it deals with something spooky happening to a kid. Nothing too shocking there. I think what makes this story unique is that it's about a little girl who's unpopular, doesn't have many friends, who makes friends with another little girl who may or may not be quite normal. What makes the story unique is that the entire story is told from the point of view of the parent, of the mother, which in itself isn't that different. There's plenty of stories and movies that have the parents looking at what's happening to their kids. The difference is in this case, it's being told through the point of view of a mother who is not that bright and doesn't really care to pay attention to what's happening to her kid. So most of the story is looking at through the mother's eyes of her being focused with traditional household duties, while off on the sidelines you are getting little snippets of dialogue and little pieces of things that basically tell you that something very wrong is going on with her daughter, while she is more concerned about burning dinner. So it's half satirical, but it does ultimately kind of come to a point that is horrifying. And it's rare to see. I think it's just a unique take on a kind of a traditional story. You know, obviously with books, you get a ton of these books that are like unreliable narrators, and what you're seeing is not necessarily the case. This isn't an unreliable narrator. It's just a narrator who is not paying attention. So you're kind of just fascinated to see when these little pieces of information are floating through, and you're just gradually being like, oh yeah, this is pretty bad. You know, I love it, and I definitely I think it's a unique twist on the little kid horror genre, and it's not something I've seen too often. So I don't know if you guys had the chance to read it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I did. And I was interesting because you were noting that the narrator was like maybe not like a strict unreliable narrator, but right off the bat, I kind of got this sense like something was off kilter. Like, is this going to be one of those stories where the whole family are ghosts or monsters? Like the reason she can't affect her kitchen is because they're poltergeists and there's like weird stuff going on. And really, at the end of the day, it's kind of like she's got an addled mind.
Right.
And then it kind of colors the story because you're like, well, is the mother like killing, like maybe the mother killed this child, and this whole like weirdness is her play on this, on the, like, you know, on that perception of this story, like that she's got, like she is not structured well and is overwhelmed very easily, and her life is kind of a mess, and her daughter is a
and she's
distraction in
defensive
that.
about it a little bit too.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I mean, basically her, you know, her husband. I mean, effectively, again, it's a series of very short scenes with the mother interacting with the daughter in some way. The daughter is trying to tell the mother about this new friend that she has that, again, may be a little weird. And the mother's, you know, when the daughter talks to the mother about the new friend having soft, furry teeth that the friend can take out of her mouth. And the mother's concept is like, okay, this kid sounds a little weird. Maybe we won't have them over for dinner, but maybe we can have them over for tea because tea is kind of short and we can deal with it quickly. And so you have this very surrealistic kind of like look at it.
That's the context at which she views the
Exactly.
story. Yeah.
Exactly.
I really love the depiction of the overwhelming. I love to cook, and I cook almost every meal. My father was a chef, so it's hard for me to understand how it's hard for people to cook. And this was a really fun to read, like the milk is burning and bubbling over, and something's rotten, and she opens a drawer and something smashes. And it did a really good job of kind of amping up being overwhelmed by a kitchen, which is something that I don't, connect with, which was really cool.
So you're sympathetic to the mother. You're basically
totally.
oh my God.
Poor mom.
I get
Get
it.
that kid out
I
of
get
there.
it,
Who
people.
cares
The
what's going
struggle
on?
is real.
Got it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I can relate because I do like that's the part of cooking that I always have trouble with is that multitasking. Like, oh, you got to keep track of this while you do that and prep this, and that I get quickly overwhelmed by it, and like things can go wrong. So that's why I do like simple dishes that have like
Jules is the king of one pot cooking.
yeah, or like a thing where you prep everything, like stir fry.
Right.
You prep everything and then you cook it. Like I can handle that. But
Yeah.
if multiple things are cooking at one time, it's trouble.
My dad was a caterer as well. So that was all, I guess he wasn't too worried about child labor. And so we spent lots of time. I mean, I was washing dishes and cutting things as a very young child. And that is sort of a core tenet, the idea of being able to multitask. I really loved seeing somebody struggle with multitasking in short story form. It's cool.
Well, I think too. I think that's the difference between. I just think that in this time that this was written, or from the point of view of this character, she never. Cooking's not a lot of thing that she gets to do. It's a thing she has to do. You know what I mean? And
Yes.
and it's not like she mentions at one point like, oh, I got this thing at the deli or whatever. It's almost
Right.
like such a weight lifted from her. Leading like the first half of it, I was like, okay, so we're gonna reveal that she's cooking up people or something at some point here. That she's
That's
like
where I was at.
she's a cannibal or something. Yeah, she's cooking up the people's cannibal
or
meal.
like making bait to catch people.
Yeah,
There's
yeah.
all this weird, I'm like, oh, this is gonna be spooky, and then you kind of get, oh, this is someone who's just easily overwhelmed and confused, and then the horror is more that like the parents don't believe their kid, because if they had let this little it seems
Well,
like,
not even believe. They don't. It's not that they don't believe their kid. They don't even
Care.
listen.
Yeah,
Yeah,
listen.
exactly.
Right,
Yeah.
exactly.
and
Yeah,
at the end, yeah.
Or in what they do here, like because they're not hearing enough of it, is kind of easily dismissible. Like, oh, she has an imaginary friend, or oh,
Right.
like
But that very thing is what, at the end of the story, leads to the tragedy, where like she's magically taken apart and sort of like by this weird leprechaun thing, and now her magical decapitation means that she's alive and her parts are buried alive, and that's it. That's her.
Forever.
That's it.
yeah.
And you don't know if she's
strong
just
ending.
gonna rot or if she's gonna just be gibbering under
And it's a
6
cool,
feet.
it's a cruel. I mean, it's definitely a crueler story than you usually see, because often in stories where you have kids that are unpopular and lonely, usually in most stories it goes one or two. I mean, often it goes to the place where the kid itself has no problem taking revenge upon other people or expressing that anger, or something happens where it's more on the happier side. But in this case, the parents just even further doom their already unhappy kid to the worst scenario possible by simply not being very invested in their own kid. And it's sad. I mean, it's sad. It's funny because there's a lot of satire in the story, and it very much is of, I mean, people who like Roald Dahl short stories, especially Roald Dahl stories for adults, will read this and they'll be like, oh my God, Roald Dahl could have written this.
Yeah.
And if it's, I mean, and yes, the tale about, the mother's position here is obviously focused on more traditional household duties, but I mean, the story was written, I believe, in the late 70s. It's really only been published in one major place, which is part of a extremely acclaimed series of anthologies in the 70s and 80s called Whispers, which came out of a very popular horror fiction magazine mostly I think in the 80s. And it's worth looking up. There's 6 different anthologies, and it's in the second one, Whispers 2. All of the stories kind of focus on this very quiet, haunting horror that basically is more atmospheric and then usually just packs a punch, I mean, at the end. Mm-hmm. And, I mean, in this one, again, I just find the ending of this to be
disturbing,
horrifying. Yeah. I mean, just horrifying.
See, I thought it was more of like a McSweeney's parable about how basically the lower class in England should really not, if they can't handle cooking their own meals, they shouldn't even have children. Yeah. Like really how there's a point where the poor should just not have children because they can't handle the responsibility.
But the other interesting thing is, it just ends up being like a horror of errors in that no one is actually, like, even the being that that decapitates her means well, and that, and it's kind of sweet in a way, and just strange, but like well-meaning, and so none of it could have ended just like actually wonderfully, right? Like, and just through a series of miscommunications, this terrible fate befalls
and also
her.
I mean, what dooms her is that her parents actually finally pay attention.
Yes.
I mean, they just pay attention at the exact wrong moment.
Right.
And they react in a terrible way, and that basically dooms her. So, I mean, again, it's kind of a nasty joke that they've gone, 8 years, 10 years with not even being aware of anything their daughter is doing. And the first time in their life, they actually open their eyes and take a look, and basically it results in the worst possible thing in the world happening to her. So.
Now, do you know, is there a parallel monster that, like, I was just trying to think if there's anything.
It was unique.
Yeah, like whether it was like a a tweak on like the fairies or sort of like.
I don't think so. I mean, obviously in the story, the friend's name is called I Need, which the mother keeps correcting the daughter when the daughter calls it I Need to be Enid, because she's sure that the daughter is just saying it wrong. But I mean, obviously, I Need, this creature is helping this girl and this other kid fix them. So one kid has malformed legs, and the creature is able to remove the legs, straighten them out, and put them back, and the kid can walk. So it's giving them, I think, the things they need. I mean, as well as friendship. Again, it just goes badly, but I'm sure it's just it's just kind of a unique. It feels like a unique creation that's purpose. And obviously, the writer is just kind of, because everything is so off stage and you're never sure what's going on. The author clearly has no problems like throwing in little things like, oh, it has green hair. Sure, it does, and it has furry teeth. Yeah, it's great. So I mean, I think it's just making it up as they go along a little.
It does give the impression of like a woodland kind of creature because it has leaf-like hair and things like that.
Yes.
I thought it was like, it was enough that like I was able to picture something, which was like kind of like Gollum, skinny Gollum with leafy hair.
Yeah. But there is this idea to me, I mean, you mentioned something before, but I mean, the idea of like eternal suffering, which is never a great feeling to end a story on. But
it reminded me of this like amazing French film, which I think was also remade here. It's killing me, I can't remember the name, but essentially it's like, it's this guy whose girlfriend disappears, and he knows that it was like
Vanishing.
Exactly, yes.
Yes.
And like, man, the ending of that movie. Oh.
Yeah, and see the original if you haven't seen either, go see the original. But but both pretty similar. Kiefer Sutherland.
Yeah,
remake?
But the original I think like just was better,
darker and nastier.
Yeah.
So
and just that ending. Oh.
You see that.
I have a question for you.
So The Vanishing.
The Vanishing.
The
Vanishing. The Vanishing.
Where So you said you hadn't read this, and you said 25 years.
About
or
that, I think. Yeah.
Where did you first come across this? In
the
that anthology?
In the anthology,
Wow,
yeah. So,
okay.
like, in the 80s in particular, there were 2 or 3 major horror anthologies that were released, mostly in mass market paperback. There are book club hardcovers, but that basically hit it out of the park with every story. And the 2 big anthologies series were Shadows, which was edited by Charles L. Grant, who passed away, and Whispers, who was edited by Stuart David Schiff, who's still around and fantastic. And Whispers grew out of a magazine where the anthologies repeated some of the stuff in the magazines, but then added new stuff as well. And they're all easily available on secondhand marketplace at Amazon for like $1 or $2 a piece, and I recommend getting them. But they all focus on quiet, real story-driven horror. But this one in particular just is horrifying. And I recently came across a copy of the book, and I was like, oh yeah, it's definitely one of my favorite short stories of all time. I mean, I definitely am big into stories that look at childhood through horror. But this one has a style to it that I think is quite different.
And as we talked about it made me realize, like, because it's how incredible it is how much information is conveyed in such a short story in an indirect fashion.
Yes.
And yet you have, like, by the end, you have such a clear understanding of the family dynamics, of who the people are, and of what's happened. It's, like, kind of really impressive.
And
like,
even almost like the layout of the house. I
Yeah,
felt like,
yeah,
you know, like,
yeah.
I feel like I knew where the kitchen was in relation to her bedroom, and yeah.
Yeah, and
Cool.
it's so subtle, you know. It's
Yeah.
like, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I'll get on my soapbox, but I mean, there's still great horror short fiction out there, but I do feel, and unfortunately, there's still a lot of the writers that were writing for those anthologies are still writing terrific horror out there, like Steve Raznik-Tem and others as well. But some of that art has been lost, and I do miss the fact that, like, on my bookshelves, I have like over 100 mass market paperback anthologies where most of the people inside you've never heard of, but there are, like, so many strong stories, and each one is something that you've never seen before. I just feel that art is lost a little, especially since most anthologies nowadays are thematic. So you definitely have a lot of zombie anthologies or vampire anthologies, and the problem with that is that going into the story, it's already tainted because you already it's like
It's
like
got
watching
so much
trailers.
connotation.
As opposed, I mean, there are these vampire anthologies that have some of the best vampire short stories in them, but the joke of the story is often that you don't know that it's about a vampire until the last second. And so, of course, by sheer nature of it being in the anthology, it's completely botched for the reader, which just sucks. So.
Yeah, there were some great fantasy and horror
Yes.
anthologies, like Year's Best.
Absolutely.
Were some of my favorites. There's some great like retelling of classic fairy tales was coming out, and then people have been redoing those over and over. But
and many
some
people
really
who
solid
wrote
work.
fantasy, like, I don't know if you guys know Tanith Lee, but Tanith Lee is one of my favorite writers. But, like, she is in so many of these horror anthologies, and also Year's Best Horror, which was edited by, like, Harlow Wagner for many years and stuff. And you have a lot of these fantasy, and I think David Campton actually mostly did fantasy and science fiction, but so many of these authors that are known for fantasy actually use short stories to get out their most horrific, like, impulses. Because, I mean, there's you pick up these anthologies and you're seeing names of people who are widely known in science fiction fantasy, and then you're just like, wow, they really, like, had to get it out of their system that we're going to do really horrible things to people in the worst ways possible in 10 pages, and then we go back to my epic fantasy.
Now I'm done with that. I can
Exactly.
go back to sword fighting.
Exactly. So it's so I really do love it, and yeah, I mean, it's just this is a story that packs a punch, but in general, like I said, looking for those anthologies, especially the Shadow series and the Whispers series. I know a lot of people don't read a lot of short fiction nowadays, but there's a real art to being able to pull off a story in short fiction. I mean, on last week's episode, you talked about creepypasta, which to me is less story and more vignette, which I totally appreciate. I can totally appreciate the idea of, in microfiction and super short content, being able to effectively create a nightmarish vision that can inspire something. But I have to say, there's something about a really tight short story that has this beginning, middle, and end in, like, 2,000 words or 3,000 words or even 8,000 words or 10,000 words, where I know many authors who feel that it's way harder to write a short story than a novel. And when you read these great short stories, you're like, totally understand it.
Well, yeah, because it's the when you look at the great short story writers, they're the craftspeople writers.
Yes.
The workaday writers, the ones who, like your Vonnegut, and even his short stories aren't that, like, concise. Why
Well,
can't I
I'd
think
say
of
King.
Yes.
Some of his
Stephen King
best
and,
work for me are his short stories.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean,
Between the Bachman books, and
Ray
different
Bradbury
seasons,
was who I was
I mean,
thinking
of
too,
course,
yeah.
Ray Bradbury. I mean, you look at you can pick up an omnibus of Ray Bradbury's first 100 short stories or whatever, and you feel like 95 of them are effectively, if not, either hitting it out of the park or at least sticking with you in some way that you're just like, woof. I mean,
And it's
that
because
is
they're
tough stuff.
such craftspeople. They're so good at the craft that it's almost a challenge. How
Right.
what could I cram in the fewest amount of pages and words and with the most punch?
Right.
And it really is like you're the master of your craft. The better you are at that.
And
form.
also, my problem with so much horror novel, I love horror novels and I read a ton of them, but many of them clearly are either they haven't been outlined, meaning authors have clearly written themselves into a corner at some point and I'm not sure how to get them out, or they're not heavily edited enough, I think. And with a short story, it simply doesn't work if it's not edited down to every word. Frankly, I feel this. I'll be honest, I feel this way about a novel as well, but certainly in a short story, every word should be there for a reason. You have to ask yourself, why is this sentence here? And if you can't answer why that sentence is there, it should come out. And again, I do feel that way about novels, but certainly in short stories, I think there's a lot of authors who understand that craft, and it's amazing that they do it because it's not like anyone ever got paid a lot for a short story.
Yeah.
So and I've talked to certain authors like Gary Braunbeck, who's written a couple hundred short stories, or Bentley Little, who's this amazing horror author who's written hundreds of amazing, twisted short stories. And so, I think they just feel it's something they have to do. I mean, it's a story that they feel they have to tell, and this is the best way to do it. I just give them so much respect for that. It's incredible.
Yeah, there's Borges was basically an anti-novelist to that point, where he was like, it's unnecessary. A short story
Wasted
will tell you
pages.
the story. It's a waste otherwise. And I mean, this is a guy who would write fake reviews for books as short stories for himself, like non-existent books as jokes, and put them in literary magazines. But this was he wrote short stories because that was all he needed to get his idea out. And he felt that a novel was like an unnecessary exercise, which is a strong opinion. But for someone who devotes themselves to that craft and hones it, he was doing real good.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's almost like an artist kind of not appreciating photography and considering it not an art form.
I mean, it's not. It's an objective use of a tool.
Right.
I mean, you're basically just turning on a box and putting light on a piece of paper.
Exactly. I'm kind of looking from above, and it's pretty interesting that all of our picks kind of have some childhood aspect to them. In the past, that wasn't always the case. In a lot of our picks in the past, it hasn't been that necessarily. I guess Poltergeist at one point.
Halloween 3 is definitely a kid thing, and that actually, to go back to Candle Cove or these, it's kids getting their comeuppance.
Ouch.
For being bad kids.
I don't know if the kid in my story is getting her comeuppance for a second.
I don't know. She was pretty greedy.
I mean, she did. Well, she
She
did break her glasses at one point.
That's
so.
right, and she put them in a place to intentionally be broken.
Yes.
And she was being kind of mean to
about her
and
mother,
being like, "Hey, fix me, come on." She's being persistent,
a little pushy.
Wow.
and
and she was being mean to her mom by saying she never pays attention to her.
That's right.
Very Dr. Phil look at the scenario. So, but you're right. I was thinking that too about how all the picks are basically childhood, not the best place to be.
Well, I think though part of it is that you then relate to the childhood characters, which then brings you back to your own childhood and how you related to how your
world.
imagination was, and you relate to the world, and I think that fear and was a lot more potent then, and our imaginations were a lot more vivid.
Well, you're a little more open. You may or may not be an objective supernaturalist, or you may not believe in spirituality or the spirit, spiritual realm or whatever as an adult. But as a kid, you may have had no opinion about it or been open to experiences.
Yeah, exactly.
And
Well,
so,
I think as a kid, you're filling in the gaps a lot more.
Right.
You're filling in the blanks because you don't understand everything, so you're filling it in with your imagination.
But the
you have
idea
fewer
being that
tools to rationalize things.
even if you're a believer or a non-believer or whatever, if you
or a true believer.
As a kid, everyone has a more common belief structure or sort of lack of belief structure that hinders them from experiences that makes it easier to have an inroad in these kind of stories. I was scared of this stuff then, and now that opens you up to what if it was real now and scare you.
I think it's also more potent. Whenever things are happening to children, it's more
Visceral.
Yeah.
Ooh,
Right.
weird.
Pinch poke, you owe me a Coke.
Exactly. I mean, but I was reading. I mean, I have to admit, I think I was reading adult horror short stories by the time I was like 11 or 12. I think I started with a Harlan Ellison story called "I Have No Mouth and I Must Scream," was my first that I picked off my dad's bookshelf, which also was traumatizing in its own way. But like, I mean,
It all comes back to teeth.
But like, how early in your childhood were you guys reading like adult stuff?
For like the horror stuff? I mean,
Not horror necessarily, but I mean even science fiction, fantasy, or even
like
fiction
weird,
in general.
like weird fiction. So 10, 11, reading like Lovecraft and Fritz Leiber and.
That's impressive though.
But
I mean, Lovecraft especially is tough read for.
Right.
Yeah, but it's like all in that pulp realm.
Yeah.
And if you start in the right spot, like if you're reading Conan and Frofrod and the Grey Mouser and that kind of stuff, like it's more accessible maybe in some degree than like Wells or Burroughs, because those guys are a little more archaic in their language, even more so. Whereas like Lovecraft's, xenophobic rantings are like
totally accessible to the average 10-year-old.
But if you like his weird world, he's using weird words.
Yes.
And so that all sort of jives. Like you're like, oh, this is not a word that's commonly used or even I recognize, and he's using it to describe something that I can't recognize. And so that actually makes it easier for me to get into the weirdness of that story.
Because it's not like I'm missing something, so I don't get it. It's just that I don't get it because it's ungettable.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Unpronounceable.
I mean, stuff that would have been like Gene Wolfe or that kind of stuff. Like that stuff is like next level weird kind of stuff. Like where that would have been probably impenetrable to me at that age.
I read when I was in 7th grade, which I think is like 11, 12. I read The Shining, and that was like way that.
You're batting out of your
It was the longest book I'd ever read too, so it was like I kept going because I was really excited about that. And
I'm a big kid.
Yeah, and my mom is a big reader and loves Stephen King, and she didn't know. I mean, I really wanted to read The Shining. I don't know how I got it in my head that I wanted to. I probably saw the Treehouse of Terror episode, the Simpsons episode, The Shinning, right? And that probably was it.
Well, it could have been that remake might have come out around that same time.
That's why when we were about 12, 13, like 6th, 7th grade, we were reading Stephen King's Stand because they had the
movie
miniseries.
coming out.
And so everyone was like, just like they used to lug Harry Potter books around.
Right.
Every other kid had their Stand.
Huge brick-shaped The Stand. Yeah.
Right. But I remember my mom.
But not with Tommy knockers.
No.
I did.
My mom asked my teacher if I could have permission to, like, she didn't know like what is right for a kid, like if it would be traumatizing or not. And my teacher said he will understand what he understands and not understand what he doesn't understand. I think it's a pretty cool stance for like a 7th grade teacher to.
Your teacher was like, "Relax, this guy made Maximum Overdrive.
Yeah.
You're gonna be okay."
It's fine. Yeah, and that like definitely set me on my path for sure.
Oddly, I found out in college that I actually had a reading disability. So I didn't read an awful lot, but what I did read in school until high school, like in high school, suddenly I'm like, I need to read everything. But up until then, I was always reading these weird like history books about. I read about Kit Carson, about Davy Crockett, about Robert E. Lee.
Oh, wow.
There's the Andrew Johnson, the president from Tennessee. Like all these really weird.
I mean, about our heritage.
Yeah, but it was this set that was in our library. It was a specific set, and they were all like a nice small size. I just went all the way through it.
I remember there was a similar like small like odds and ends, not a full set, but I read like so many like cryptozoology books.
Awesome.
Like, and because you just have this library of just like Loch Ness and all like Sasquatch and all that.
Well,
awesome
those are the things I still gravitate toward, those where they're kind of like I would much rather read the Marvel Universe books that were kind of like an encyclopedia of Marvel Universe rather than the whole stories. You know what I'm saying?
Well, I do that on like
that
Wikipedia now.
Yeah.
I'm not gonna buy a
The
comic.
cliff notes of.
Yeah.
Yeah, but it's not. It's more than the cliff notes because it's everything about Spider-Man all in one thing. Like his history, his like wives who've died, like all of it. All
So you're the kind of guy who like in the bathroom likes reading like the old D&D monster manuals just because
Exactly.
you're just like I don't want to play the game.
Yes.
I just want to read about all the different monsters.
Honestly, that is me exactly. Like, in fact, John has tried to get me to play Dungeons and Dragons a bunch of times. I'm just like, I'd rather just draw the pictures and read the
Read about the purple worm.
Exactly.
Yes, purple worm.
I need a beholder. That's
Exactly.
It. Yeah.
Platinus Cube seems
I'm
awesome.
like, dude, unless I can be a kobold, I don't want to play this game.
Hey, there's a game all about being kobolds.
I mean, did you read kids' books when you were kids, or you just didn't read at all?
No, I mean I read what the
Assigned.
school told me to read, and comic books. I read a bunch of comic books, but yeah.
I will give a plug for people who read horror books, novels, that they should go back at some point and read as much as Robert Cormier as they can, who did The Chocolate War and I Am the Cheese, just because these teen books that are 100 pages are by far more horrifying than 99% of adult books. I mean, so it's worth checking out.
Which one is there?
The Chocolate War is famous, obviously, and I Am the Cheese, but literally Robert Cormier's lesson to kids in these books is life is not fair. And it is, they are dark, dark books. I mean, they are some of the most horrifying books you'd ever read. Obviously, they were all huge bestsellers. You almost can't go wrong with anything Cormier did, but After the First Death is another one that's famous. But they are just unflinching looks at the horrors of childhood in a way that you don't see that much. Basically, the problem with adult fiction is you don't see a lot of bad things happening to kids in adult fiction. I mean, it is usually not.
Unless they're like refrigerated or whatever that, like they're used as just like a
device.
Like, what a tragic thing to have happened in your life that you lost your child.
Exactly.
Let's use that as a driving point for your motivation. And
it usually can feel very exploitational to actually use like Kids in Jeopardy or stuff in adults. But I mean, Robert Cormier, there are other YA authors who definitely have done it fantastically, but Robert Cormier is the king of it. And I Am the Cheese is probably maybe the perfect example of I won't say weird fiction, because almost all his books are grounded purely in reality, but they are dark and twisty and deeply disturbing. I think adults sadly probably don't go back and look at these books, but they should, because they will haunt you more than adult books will.
There was a period when they were making these just completely terrifying movies and marketing them to kids, like Something Wicked This Way Comes.
Oh yeah,
Disney
movies.
Yeah, still the vision, the imagery from that movie is still very frightening. Some of the audio cues and things, just really something.
Yeah, PG horror. Look, a lot of the best horror movies of all time are rated. Poltergeist was PG.
Yeah.
Honestly, it was
but
pretty traumatizing.
JC Superstar was G. Like, they hadn't quite gotten all the ratings.
Yeah.
But Poltergeist is scary. Again, my
Poltergeist is terrifying.
My favorite horror movie of all time is, even though it's not for kids, is still the 1978 version of Invasion of the Body Snatchers, which is PG. Although, given it has a little nudity, it probably would be rated R nowadays, just for the nudity.
The Donald Sutherland version.
Donald Sutherland and
really
Veronica
good.
Cartwright and Jeff Goldblum and Leonard Nimoy and Brooke Adams, and so.
But Nimoy you can't just name him for the new one. He was in the old dude, right?
No.
Well, that's the 70s. He's talking about the 70s.
No, I'm talking about the 78 version.
Right. Yeah.
The only one who's in both is Kevin McCarthy, who was in the
right.
50s version or 60s, and then he's in the first scene of the remake and gets killed by a car. And it's just kind of a joke.
What's
So-
the one from the 90s that has Madge Mick in it?
Well, Body Snatchers with Meg Tilly was Abel Ferrara's remake of Invasion of the Body Snatchers, and that's with Meg Tilly, and it wasn't her, it was Gabrielle Anwar.
That's it. Yeah,
who's fantastic.
Yeah.
That one is it has some amazing moments, and it basically, but it doesn't come to the same punch as some of the others. But she's great, and Meg Tilly is fantastic.
I can't believe I mixed up my Gabriel Anwar
what
with
is up with
Madge
that?
Mick. Come on.
Of course, you get the Faculty and the Invasion with Nicole Kidman and Daniel Craig. So plenty of ones.
They keep. Yeah, that's
keep doing
ripe.
It. But again, you're right though. But Something Wicked This Way Comes. Frankly, you have even movies like the Dark Crystal or stuff. You definitely have some kids' movies that we're not afraid to go
I'm waiting
dark.
for it to kind of happen again. I do feel like adults have reached this kind of respect level for kids. I feel like that era, it was okay because literally the parents were kind of ignoring their kids. So they're like, you want to watch this petrifying movie? Go ahead.
Yeah.
It's fine. It's PG. It checks out. It's made by Disney. But I feel like we are reaching an era where parents are encouraging their kids to try to exercise this part of them if they want to see. I really think that there's a respect for their kids now that we can start seeing cool movies like that again.
Yeah, there is something very interesting about a lot of those films that it's not quite a bait and switch, but you definitely think you're getting something a little gentler, and then it picks its moment, and you're just like whack. Like a 2x4 across the head, just being like, okay, that's pretty horrifying.
And I think most of the horror I was exposed to as a kid, like I didn't mean to, what I mean? I just it's because I didn't know like what I was getting. I was like, I'm into science fiction. Like I think the first horror thing I read was like, I was kind of getting into sci-fi. I was maybe like 9 or something, and I just like pick a book at the library. I was like, this looks cool. And it was like horror sci-fi. It was like bad stuff happening in space, and I just was petrified reading this book. And same
But you
with
kept on reading.
same
didn't
with
you?
movies and stuff on TV. It was just like, oh, like my grandpa's falling asleep. Let me switch the channel. Be like, oh, what's this? Like, oh, this is really scary. Like,
Yeah.
stuff like that.
Well, certain movies were events in my, because you had pretty much like one TV, so that's what you were watching.
Yeah.
And I remember, when Friday the 13th came on, like it must have been regular TV, or maybe it was like one of those free Showtime weekends. But like all of us, cousins, everybody was piled up in my grandmother's living room, like pretty much stacked on top of each other. There was like probably 16 of us all in this room, and just like way too young to be watching.
Watching Kevin Bacon get
Yeah, and I actually
killed.
I think it was Friday. Which was the one where they killed him with a rake, or where he gets hit with a rake? Because that's part 3, I think. Where it turns out it was the mother.
so the first one.
No, so
Is
so
the
it wasn't the
mother. Jason's not in the first one.
right. It was so. Which one? Somebody gets Jason's there, and somebody hits him with a rake. I think it's part 2,
Wow.
maybe.
I'm sad to say that of the 18,000 victims in Friday the 13th movies, I can't identify the rake hitting scene.
Yeah.
I mean, but let's put it this way: if it wasn't in 3D, well, it wasn't in 3D back then it wasn't part 3. And but if he had a hockey mask,
Yeah.
it was 3 or
3.
on.
I
Because
think
in
it
2
was
it was a
3.
bag over the head.
Yeah.
So
I do believe it was part 3 because it was like a big deal, and
Wow.
also the King Kong in 3D when it came to TV was like that. Jaws 3 came to TV and 3D. Those were like
you guys are so
everyone goes
young
to
that
grandma.
you guys did not able to see these in the theater in 3D. I mean,
Well, I was old enough to see it in a theater. We just very rarely went to the theater.
Okay.
We saw Wrath of Khan in a theater in a drive-in, and I believe.
okay, you are old.
Yeah. Well, I didn't drive. But and I think I saw like Raiders of the Lost Ark. There were very few movies we saw in the theater. It had to be a big one.
So just to pull us back a little bit,
Out of Nostalgia Corner.
yeah, have you read other stuff from this author? From
No,
David
actually,
Campton?
a lot of these stories are written by authors who I've never been able to find like another horror story. There's a bunch of David Camptons out there or people with Campton, and unclear which ones are the same. So but I've never read another story by him, and many of my favorite stories, it's the only horror story they've ever written. So it's weird. So yeah, I can't. I've done research, and he's one of the people I can't really seem to dig up exactly what else he's done or hasn't done.
I think he was a guitarist in Cream for a little while. Right?
Maybe. So, but, exactly. Well, I mean, one of the original Little Rascals grew up to be a fantastic horror short story writer who I think just passed away last year. Who is great. So she grew up to write very dark fiction as well. Jean Darling was her name. And so.
Do you remember which character in Little Rascals?
She wasn't
Darla.
She wasn't Darla. She was pre-Darla, I think.
Oh,
I think
wow.
there was a blonde girl who was around before Darla, and she was that. So she was, I guess, one of the original Little Rascals. But yeah, it's crazy to read these horrific stories, and again, some of them have to do with not great things happening to little kids.
Yeah.
So it's the opposite, the anti-Little Rascals. So
Well, no, Little Rascals, they had a really rough time, apparently. They were, like, really exploited.
Oh, in real life?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And Blake Edwards ended up killing some people, so.
wow.
What?
Didn't he?
Who?
Blake Edwards? He was one of the Little Rascals, and
Blake Edwards, director of like SOB and stuff.
I think
Or-
so. Yeah. And he was one of the Little Rascals. He was Natalie Wood's husband.
Okay.
Am I wrong about this?
I mean, wasn't
And Christopher Walken was on the boat, and they were about to make a movie with Natalie Wood and Christopher Walken, and she disappeared off the boat.
Blake Edwards was not married to Natalie Wood though, right?
Who?
Am I hallucinating? It's what's his name? It's
Robert Blake.
Yeah, that's
Is it
Robert.
Robert Blake. Sorry.
Okay.
Yeah.
Somewhere-
Sorry, Blake Edwards.
Somewhere Blake Edwards is queuing up his lawyers. So
But Robert Blake was a Little Rascal as well.
okay,
Yeah.
got it. Okay, yes, yes, okay.
Yeah.
But he did murder Truman Capote's Breakfast at Tiffany's.
So glad you were able to bring us back to our original discussion somehow. So, but no, I haven't. I mean, I haven't read, and again, I mean, I wish that more TV and movies, especially TV, were based on these short stories. I will say Tales from the Dark Side actually took a ton of stories from some of these anthologies I'm talking about and translated them. Outside of that, like other series, like I don't know if you remember Monsters and Twilight Zone, obviously, both the original and the 80s version of Twilight Zone is heavily based on a lot of the short stories from that era as well.
Do you
it's
think
happy
they
to see
need to, or do they need to credit anyone?
that. Oh, and they do.
I
all of
imagine
them-
they would usually hire them to write the screenplay.
In some cases, yes. In some cases, no. Like George R. R. Martin definitely wrote a bunch of the '80s Twilight Zone episodes,
and he did. There was like a new Outer Limits or
there was a remake of the Outer Limits as well.
Because I remember there was the.
I didn't see enough of Outer Limits to know how much is based on short stories, but like Twilight Zone, again, both the original and the '80s remake, which I love, which other people don't love, but even the story. I mean, so there's a famous episode of the '80s Twilight Zone episode called Button Button, which is based on a short story called The Box by Richard Matheson, which was then turned into, ironically, a full-length movie starring Cameron Diaz, directed by the guy who did Donnie Darko, which was a terrible movie that basically took the Twilight Zone episode, and then after the Twilight Zone episode ended, he added on another 45 minutes, and kind of, by the way, Donnie Darko is one of my favorite films of all time, but kind of ruined one of my favorite.
Well, we actually did an episode, like a What Happened topic, and was it Richard Garfield? Yeah. Not Richard Garfield, but it's a
Kelly, right?
Richard Kelly.
Yeah.
One
Southern
of our
Tales?
What Happened was, hit to him since Donnie Darko, Southern Tales, and then The Box.
Yeah. So, I mean, but although the Box is better than Southland Tales, I think. Low bar, though.
That's a little bit.
God.
I think Southland Tales has been revisited. I think people are like,
that's a mistake. But anyway, but yeah, I mean, so I think again, I think it's funny when you talk about Stephen King. Like a lot of his short stories have been translated into movies. I mean, obviously, Children of the Corn.
Yeah.
And God, how many of his?
App People, Stand By Me.
A little longer. At least those are novellas. Right. But I mean, it's tough.
Total Recall.
It's tough.
The Long
Philip
Walk.
K. Dick.
Even,
Philip K. Dick short stories have been and again, they basically The Lawnmower Man, which has almost nothing to do with the short story.
Yes.
Outside of there is a lawnmower in one scene. So the 30-minute TV kind of does lend itself pretty well to adapting short stories, and so this is one I had wished had been done, but I think it would be very hard to visualize.
I mean, in this age of using, I almost feel too that in this age of using film to try to tell a novel, it's sometimes nicer. Like you almost wish, take a short story and tell the short story in a 90-minute format.
Correct.
And use the television episodic format to tell the novel.
I mean, the vast majority of classic Twilight Zone episodes that people remember, whether It's a Good Life with a little kid that can make anything happen, or To Serve Man and stuff like that.
Incident on Owl.
Incident Owl. Yeah, I mean, these are all based on short stories. I mean, I think Eye of the Beholder is not. I mean, there's a few that aren't based on short stories, but so many of them are, and it's just great. I just miss it. So
yeah, but it really feels like that. Like right now, TV is really going deep, going big. So I think going movies with that stuff would be great.
Yeah.
So but I mean, if the industry would allow mid-range budget movies to exist anymore, which they don't really for grown-ups.
I'm gonna bring us to last thoughts on At the Bottom of the Garden by David Campton. So I'm gonna start us off. I kind of I do want to dig for this monster and see if it's something that exists, but I think it's like a leprechaun or something. I don't know. But I really enjoyed the short story, and I think I'll go find those anthologies.
I agree. What I like is the discussion that came out of this. This is really neat. The idea that that there were people who made their livings making short stories. That it might still be the case, there aren't as many people making their bones that way. Sadly, disappearing art form.
Yeah. For me, this really brought back. There's something very nostalgic about it that I can't quite put my finger on. For me, that reminds me of the quiet, and they weren't horror, but this sort of quiet British or Canadian cartoons that would come on in the early, for me, it was the early 90s when I was growing up on Nickelodeon, sort of bringing in, just desperate for content and bringing in all of these. I mean, David the Gnome is probably the highest profile one, but all of these really quiet, nice fairy tale anthologies that sometimes had pretty scary. I mean, they were pretty tied to Brothers Grimm. It reminded me of that, this slower, quieter, pastoral pace to children's storytelling and this isn't a child story, but it brought me back to that. And I really love it. And it's like scratching an itch that I didn't know I had. Yeah.
Jules, any thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely making me want to explore this genre more. I've never been somebody to seek out horror, but I think through these episodes, honestly, I'm it's kind of pushing me back towards it, and I'm really appreciating the form a lot more and realizing there's a lot more there for me. And it's not And it's not always that frightening in a way. Like, I can handle it. I think part of me is like, maybe I can't handle this, but I can, and it's really like there's a lot of rewarding stuff in there. And I'm also surprised that like short stories aren't kind of like the thing right now, because I feel like that the issue is like attention span. Do you know what I mean? And like it just seems to suit like the pace of right now. But I feel like they haven't found the right way to market them.
There's fewer paying markets nowadays for short stories, especially in
Yeah.
print. You know, with a lot of people self-publish, short content, and short story collections aren't as big. I just think it's tricky, but I think the art of the anthology. There are fantastic anthologies out there, and there are fantastic editors like Ellen Datlow who do great stuff. But I do miss this kind of ongoing series of anthologies that are very quiet horror. That again, like you said, they're not scary, but you still think about them days, weeks later, and being like,
they're
it's creepy.
They're
creepy.
haunting.
It's
Yeah.
creepy. It's creepy and disturbing. So I'm thrilled that you guys doing this podcast gave me the chance to revisit the story, and I've been going back and reading more and more. So thank you.
Also, this was like yesterday, this is like mid-late September. The Paperbacks from Hell
Yes,
collection. I think they
Amazing.
just did like a pre-launch little party.
just
a
came out on
couple days ago.
Tuesday. Yeah, so it's out now, and definitely it's a fantastic book.
Yeah, so that's just sort of collecting and talking about sort of like the shock value book, but talking about 80s horror fiction.
A lot of paperback horror. Looking at the covers and looking at the stories behind them.
Amazing.
It's well worth looking at.
So yeah, and so David Campton, they can find that online.
You
or
can
in the
Google or
anthologies.
at your site. You'll have the link, right?
Yeah, we'll
so-
throw the link on
yes.
there. Cool. All right, thank you for the pick.
Thank you.
Such a question, there are many possible answers, such as hard work,
Feel I'm alone in this whole of existence. I know it takes time, but I'm losing my persistence. The distance is too far to fetch, so I sketch on pages and hope that some catch the thoughts of my inverted worded music. No
Hey everybody, thanks for listening to another episode of the New to You Show. I was one of your hosts, John Holt. You can find me on Twitter at BoardJoho and on Instagram at Board_Ghost. And you can listen to my RPG storytelling podcast at BoardGhost.com. And you can listen to this show at newtouyoushow.com. I've been working on a new book show that'll launch in late October, and we're actually going to start with a couple of short stories. I'm going to plug myself here a little bit.
Yes, please.
We're going to one of the first short stories will be Borges' Garden of Forking Paths, and one of the second episodes will be Robert Aikman's Wine Dark Sea from his Wine Dark Sea collection. So a weird fiction from the 60s for that second one, and sort of magical realism that's like a precursor to magical realism with the other one. So go check out woundstab.com for more information.
And it's
on that.
it's going to be a read along podcast.
It'll be a
right?
read along, so we'll encourage you to read those stories and then listen, and we'll have a little discussion of the reading and then talking to a tangentially related guest.
Cool. Looking forward to it.
Yeah.
And I was your other host, Julian Cates. You can find me on Twitter and Instagram at Beautiful Jules. How about you, Keith?
You can find me on earthlingkeith.com. I'm Keith Vincent. How about you, Jocko?
You can find me everywhere on all the social medias at my name, Jocko Farino. It's tricky to spell because it's 3 Italian, 5 me, but it's Giaco Farino.
And look for me, Matt Schwartz, on Facebook somehow in New York City. Just look for the guy who talks about horror movies all day.
All right. Thanks again, guys, for being on. It's great to have
Thanks
so
for
many
having us.
guests.
Having us.
But you're not done yet. First, we're going to ask, what was new to you this week? Whose turn is it?
Mine. Recently, I finished the book by Neil Stevenson called Snow Crash. It's kind of a, modern day. It's
Well,
kind of
modern.
It was a modern
late
classic.
80s, early
I
90s,
would
yeah.
say it's anybody of this generation would consider it kind of a classic, and it was kind of sold to me in that way. Very, very, very interesting book, but a lot of parts kind of disappointed me a little bit. It started off like remember when on the internet there'd be the Eric Blevins stories where it's just like, and this dude was so awesome, he rocked on his guitar, these kind of like fake stories written by comedians.
He's a hardcore pizza delivery
Yeah,
man.
exactly. So when the when the book started, I mean that's kind of how it felt the whole time, and it never really got beyond that. But like some of the concepts in it were just really remarkable, really neat, and the language he uses was very, very interesting. But I just kind of, it just really reminded me of the '90s and like the comic book guys with trench coats. Like, oh, he's a superhero, but he wears a trench coat. He can manipulate matter or whatever, but he still has swords and machine guns. He rides a motorcycle. It just reminded me too much, a little bit too much
a
of that
nuclear
stuff.
bomb.
Yeah. I mean, I would recommend it. Just kind of get past that. Get past that stuff.
Didn't sound like a recommendation. But
No, get past that
Now,
stuff.
would you
It's good.
read?
Got it.
Would you read William Gibson's Neuromancer first?
I don't know.
Would you go play some Shadowrun first?
I did read. I read William Gibson and a couple of weeks. Johnny Mnemonic and those.
Yeah, it's all in that world.
Yeah.
Would you read more? Having read that, would you read more Neil Stephenson?
Absolutely would. Yeah, I absolutely. Yep. Very well researched. This book, I feel like, there's a lot of like neat intersections with history and whatnot.
Cool. And where'd you read it? Did you Kindle
Just
it?
on the paper book.
Paper book.
Mhm.
Cool. Does it still have a figure with his back to you on the cover?
No, it's got like a really neat design with a big katana sword on the front.
We've just repackaged it.
Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah, I feel like Ready Player One's like the next generation of that.
Some would argue it's the like
Rip-off of it?
the Xerox copy.
Right,
It's
right.
like degraded ever so slightly.
Yeah, but I would say like that's I think the best part about the book is just how kind of he got so much right, like about the internet and about things like that. I just feel
Yeah.
like
What was it?
It was prescient.
Second Life kind of thing.
yeah, it really was.
And how we all like own clubs and go to like clubs in Second Life.
I think we've even talked about how Orson Scott Card's
Ender's Game.
Ender's Game got so much right. This was right there next to it. Like, I mean,
Well, yeah, I mean, it
different
was
time,
interesting
but-
to learn that the bugs were like actually just trying to communicate with us.
Yeah.
We didn't have to kill them all.
The thing
You know what?
about-
Heinlein was wrong.
the thing I'm just saying that like it's pretty amazing to maybe I just was not old enough at the time to realize that maybe there was plenty of evidence that this is where it was heading, but to see two books to get it so right, when you read a lot of things and they get very wrong, so
Yeah.
it's pretty neat.
Yeah.
VR, it made me excited about VR. But that's it. Anybody else ever read that? No
No.
What,
Snow Crash.
Snow
A long
Crash?
Yeah,
time ago.
yeah, I did, yeah.
Sure.
Yeah.
Ahead of its
I
time.
have. I did. It's fun. You should read it, John.
Yeah, I think
you-
I'd like
I
it.
think you'd enjoy it. It's very popcorn. I'd say go in without
Sign me up.
strong expectation.
Which is hard to when a lot of people recommend it to you, because that's what happened to me, and I was like, eh.
Yeah. No, I mean the acclaim that came along with it and the recommendation was pretty glowing, and it's a good book, but I was just not like this. This is not like
I mean, I
blowing my mind.
I had this similar experience with Ready Player One, but it's fun, and it goes by quickly.
Right.
It's like
It's painless. It's a painless good time. It's
Right,
like
right.
Novocaine.
that's fun. But I think because you brought up Neuromancer, I like Neuromancer more. I think because it's a little
Well, it's a lot
vaguer,
shorter.
and it's also more vague,
Right.
and it's more like
And it's like what, a murder mystery
Less
story?
trying to be
basically?
cool
Yeah.
and stuff.
Yeah. Yeah,
And-
Snow Crash like goes to different places though. But
Yeah.
yeah. So next week we're going to have
Me, I think
Keith's
actually
pick,
talk about a
actually.
pick.
What?
Yeah.
So what do we have on the plate? What should people go do
So
for next
people
week?
out there listening in headphone land, check out a short animated piece called "The Jump" by Charles Hootner. Hootner.
Yeah, I think
Hutner.
one of the better ways to look for the Ghost Stories
Yeah.
anthology in the Late Night Work Club, which
Yep.
is a great like international group of animators who do this in their spare time.
Yeah, and
put together anthologies.
I believe it's so. It's actually, I think online you find it as one long
Yeah.
thing, and so I believe it's
No. If you look up if you go to
You can find
Vimeo,
So you can
look
find
up-
the individual
yeah,
thing.
Yeah.
Okay, gotcha.
Because I found it as one long thing, and it was like at the 4-minute mark or 7-minute
yeah,
mark.
it's like the second one.
in.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, if people had checked out our notes, I've linked you right to the Vimeo
I
clip.
link
think
went
I
right to
actually hit that. link.
Yeah, same here.
Really?
Yes.
Yeah.
No.
Yeah.
We'll go there in a second.
What are you talking about?
But we'll have links to that on our website, newtoshow.com. You can follow us on Twitter at newtoshow, and you should go and subscribe to the show. Follow us on iTunes, your favorite listening device, and leave a review and rating if you can when you're on iTunes, so that more people will come find us and let people know about the show. Recommend it like we recommend things to you. Well, maybe with like a little less
Caveat.
like critique.
Yeah. Don't build us up like some people do Snow Crash.
Yeah.
Just like really, just let it happen.
Yeah. Like, yes. But hey, gang, it may not be new, but maybe it's new to you.
Explosion sound.
Music, this pitiful life is all about the music. This pitiful life is all about the music. This pitiful life is all about the music. This pitiful life is all about the music.
With him together forever, without the limitation of time.